Okay, we will get started. You have my apologies. It's a few minutes late. I do think we should end on time, though. So I want to thank everyone for attending, and thank you for your time. We're here today to talk about the Early State Records Project. James Simon and I are here to talk to you about what exactly Early State Records is, what there is substantively, and what type of access we plan to provide. I am Kurt Meyer. I am the Manager of Global Content Development at LLMC. And then, of course, James Simon is on this WebEx with me, and he's the President of Collections and Services at CRL. So before you hear more from me, I will hand this over to James so he can give you some a brief introduction on how LLMC and CRL work together.
Thanks, Kurt, and hi, everybody, and thank you for joining us today. We do want to mention that we are recording this presentation, and we will be able to provide a link out to CRL member institutions afterwards in case you want to review this or save your hand cramping from taking furious notes. Just by way of quick background to set the stage for the discussion today. As most of you know, I hope, CRL and LLMC have been working together since 2010 in the Global Resources Law Partnership. This was a partnership that we established to work closely together as like-minded institutions with similar constituencies and similar missions to make accessible large quantities of material related to law and government publications. LLMC has been engaged for decades in making this content accessible, and CRL and its institutions have been the beneficiaries of a lot of that content. The partnership itself was established to align CRL member interests with those of LLMC, and in particular in making digitally accessible quantities of research materials that are of interest not just to the legal profession but also to the humanities and social sciences. So since 2010 we've been working to digitize resources that have been identified by CRL member institutions and our advisory group as strategic materials of strategic interest, and to make that material accessible through the LLMC digital platform. All members have access to LLMC Digital, and we work very closely with LLMC and its member institutions to share information about the types of content that would be of interest to researchers and to your patrons. There's also a substantial print preservation component to our partnership in that LLMC seeks to preserve the original print material in a secure storage facility after digitization. So this really contributes to the broader whole of CRL's shared print agenda as well. Since we began our partnership in 2010, we've been working to digitize long runs of materials, such as in those areas that I listed briefly here on the screen. We've digitized more than 13,000, I believe, volumes of U.S. state legislative serials as well as Canadian provincial serials, and that covers virtually all of the states from the earliest known holdings of these materials up through modern decades. We've also been working very closely to digitize content from the common law abroad bibliography, which related to British colonial interests, in particular from Africa. And we've been working on close partnerships that LLMC has developed to digitize comprehensive collections of historical legal documents and publications from countries like Haiti and Cuba. We continue along the lines of our partnership. We just recently signed a new agreement to extend our ongoing digitization, and collectively CRL and LLMC, or CRL through LLMC, have scanned more than 25,000 volumes of material that has been prioritized for the partnership. That equals more than 18 million pages of content just through the partnership alone. LLMC, of course, has vast more resources within LLMC Digital, one of which is the initiative that we want to discuss today, the Early State Records Collection, which was a program that was initiated by LLMC among its members. And Kurt will describe some of the early work on this program and what we're looking to accomplish through this special initiative. Kurt, that's what I wanted to say. Do you want to take it back from here?
Sure. Thank you, James. So, as James mentioned, we're here to talk about early state records, and I'll give you some background on exactly what it is, how big it is, and then some details on the substance of what exactly is there. So, what is it? That's a threshold question. So, in the 1940s, the Library of Congress and the University of North Carolina got an idea to film all lower 48 state legislative journals. So they drove a truck around the country, and I'm fictionalizing it here, but I'm fairly certain something like this happened. When they started showing up at the libraries, and these would have been state libraries, academic law libraries, county libraries, and things like that, they realized that there were a lot of materials at these locations which had a great deal of historical importance, but were also at risk from a preservation standpoint. So the project grew from state legislative records. These would be things, the legislature looked at when they were passing laws, documents, debates, things like that, to almost everything but the kitchen sink, for lack of a better phrase. So once it was complete, it ended up comprising 1,800 reels of film. And we think, we're not entirely sure, that it's 2.5 million pages of content. It could be more. And just to give you an idea of how big the project was in the 1940s, they drove a truck around the country with filming equipment 50,000 miles, and that's I think that's roughly 20 times back and forth across the country. So it's a really big project, and they filmed a variety of different materials. So what did they film? The gentleman who I believe spearheaded the project, William Jenkins, he wrote a finding aid in 1950. It's 2 books. It provides a 50,000-foot view of what actually is in the collection. So I'll run through the highlights from a high level of what exactly we can find in early state records. So first off, we have legislative records. As I mentioned before, this was the original intent of the project, was just to film things like these. So you've got legislative journals, debates, hearings, and then this is a rather persistent feature in the guide is miscellany toward the end. Every category has this. Statutory laws. So these would be laws that were passed. Maybe they were codified, maybe not. Session laws, special laws, and again, miscellany. Now we're getting to some pretty interesting materials here. Constitutional records. So they showed up at these libraries. They had texts of constitutions. We see drafts. Debates for the state constitutional convention. So, New York, went through had a variety of debates when they were drafting their first constitution. These things would be included in early state records. Same would go for territorial states like Idaho, Ohio, places like that. And then once again, we see miscellany. Administrative records. In early state records, this is kind of broadly defined as anything having to do with state administration. So there are executive documents. These would come from a governor. Legislative documents. Sometimes they would oversee administrative things. Sometimes you'll see that they would, the legislature would have oversight over the state library or something like that. And then you see department reports like the Academy for the Blind or the Department of Education. And again, you can't see it in the slide, but there's a miscellaneous category as well. Executive records, we'll get into some specifics of those. They're more interesting than they sound, but you've got governor journals, letter books, and just papers that were from the governor's office. Again, picture a librarian in the 1940s. They have a collection. They know it's historically important. They hand it over to LC to get it filmed. So these things are included as well. And on a limited basis, they're actually court records. So you might have minutes and dockets, just procedural things the court was doing, but there are also some interesting court briefs in these collections as well. So this should give you an idea of what is in there, but it's a very broad overview. And I kept bringing up the miscellaneous category for a reason, because what happens is when you look at those, sometimes you find the most interesting materials in the category which is the most general. And again, these are things which didn't fit in any of the broader categories, but somebody who had the knowledge actually thought they should be included in early state records. And some of the things I show you later were quite obviously miscellaneous in nature. So one of the reasons why we felt so strongly about digitizing this film set is because of a variety of preservation issues. And some of these are hangovers from the 1940s when, LC and the University of North Carolina filmed these materials. So we see graffiti on the pages. There's some examples in the slides which are rather humorous. Crumbling pages, fading ink. So right here, this is the same document. This is a land grant from 1631 they filmed. First page is very legible. The second, the ink must have started fading. And back then, the equipment was such that they couldn't enhance things as well as we can now. There's also kind of an interesting twist. What is a complete set? Some libraries, there are about 12 of them, they have complete sets, yet they seem to have different numbers of reels. Unsurprisingly, the Library of Congress is one of them, and I believe they have the most. So we're not exactly sure what's going on there, but that is a preservation issue. So, along with digitizing all of these materials, we also plan to locate originals as necessary, and this will be in the first half of the project and the second, which we're promoting right now. And we do hope to improve some of these images like this, you can see, by actually seeking out the originals. And the nice thing is they tell us in the set where they actually filmed every single thing in there. So we shouldn't have a problem unless it has completely gone away from a preservation standpoint. And then the other big preservation issue with this, again, it's 1,800 reels. We have one finding aid for it. There's an index on every reel. It's access. So if you were researching a topic, which is what most people would be probably doing in a set like this, it's almost impossible to find all the records on subject Y, like the Boston Tea Party or something like that. They're strewn about, and none of the finding aids go into enough detail to really tell you, what to find. You just have to scroll through the film and hope you find something. And then there's also something which has created a bit of a sense of urgency, and it's that, again, there aren't that many complete sets out there. Some of them, we're not exactly sure why. We don't think it's storage, but it might be, are showing up as having vinegar syndrome. There certainly are enough sets out there that it's not, we're not in dire need of doing this right now, but it is a concern because we wonder if there was a bad roll of film here and there that got mixed in. And the problem is if one goes bad, all the ones next to it go bad too. It's a chemical reaction with the acetate. So that has popped up as well, and we wouldn't want to get to a point where there aren't many copies left. So the current status of the project, we are currently digitizing phase 1. The project is on track. and fundraising is complete. So what is phase one? I call it the I-95 phase. It's all the original 13 colonies plus Maine and Florida and Native American materials. Obviously, these are the old states. So about 1,000 of the reels come from phase one for the I-95 states. The remaining 800 or so, and I'm rounding, are phase two, and that will be all the states west, lower 48. So we're talking about older states like Ohio, and then younger states like California, Arizona, places like that. All of those are included in phase two. Please note, though, that they did try to film the same pattern in the western states as they did the colonial states. It's just they are not as old. So now that I've teased this enough, what have we found in phase one, and how can it shed light on what we can find in phase two? I'll show you some interesting examples from the first half, which should kind of give you some insight what you'll see in the second. And then I did last summer spend a couple days with some states, some western states, just to see what was in there, just to see if there were, as many interesting things as phase two as there were in phase one. And I'm happy to say there are. So I'll do a little show and tell, and just show you some things I bumped into. And when I say bumped into, I mean it. I just sat there with the film and scrolled, and it didn't take much effort to find interesting materials. So this is an example of probably a miscellaneous item. They filmed these old newspapers. So this is the New York Weekly Journal from 1737. I love this one. It really gives you some details about life in colonial America. Here we have some election results. These were people from New York who were elected to the General Assembly. So, we'll get some details on what governance was like then, names, dates, people who were elected, things like that. And then there was a blurb in this publication in the corner, and they were kind of just telling everybody that the Russian army had invaded a region called Crim Tartary, which is what we would call Crimea right now. And they kind of discussed it, and you could kind of see what they thought, but it was very interesting to read that. They were interested in foreign affairs, and if nothing else, this does reinforce that history repeats itself. Another publication, I believe this was from 1825. This is the Pensacola Gazette, and this one, another newspaper. A little more detail, perhaps not as flashy as the Russia example, but it's historically important. They talk about setting up a university for Florida, and this is when Florida wasn't, officially a U.S. state. It was kind of in between. I think Spain at this time still said they owned it. But again, we're getting insights as to what was going on at the time, what people were thinking. There's a news item about incorporating Tallahassee, and then some things about housing and issues they were dealing with at the time. And these are the types of materials that are in early state records that would otherwise be pretty hard to find. Maybe these are in a state archive or a historical society, but probably not online and searchable. And then just to briefly give you an idea of what we see in phase one, this is the title list from New York. And you can pretty much read any of these titles. When we process these, we create an individual title for every document, catalog it, and abstract it. And these are titles that we created. So we've got, 1774, the Act for closing Boston Harbor, King George passed, and then, the British Army casualty list from 1775. A lot of interesting materials here that, again, many of them are not online anywhere. So those were phase one examples. What do we hope to find in phase two? Obviously, the phase two states are younger, but I assure you there's a lot of historically important material in them. A little bit more mundane, we do hope to see, fill-ins for, run-of-the-mill state materials like legislative journals, executive materials, court records that may have been lost or burned in fires, things like that, at least since 1940. So those things will be in there, and many of these are not online anywhere. But we also fully expect to see, some interesting historical materials like this one. And I'll put this in context because it's not actually just a newspaper I found. I could have broken this out into probably 5 slides. This is the Californian from 1846. So they filmed this, and this publication came out a couple months after the Bear Flag Revolt, when some Californians besieged the territorial governor from Mexico. So in this publication, they are describing the reasoning for breaking away from Mexico and why they would rather be a part of the United States. Along with this, there were orders from Governor Vallejo, troop movements and things like that, handwritten letters from his office. But the problem was you had this newspaper and then some of these other documents in other parts of early state records, maybe another part of the real film, or maybe another real film altogether. And somebody in 1940 thought, hey, we better film all of these. They have to do with the beginnings of our state. But they were all kind of scattered about, and the findings don't really tell you, what's there, even on the most granular level, which is the film index. So, all of these things are in there. They're just very difficult to find unless you have unlimited time. There are Secretary of State records for all of the other states, the other 33 states. These may not sound interesting at first glance, but they are. Remember, these were times when the Secretary of State had to handwrite records, and in territorial times, they didn't seem to have printing presses, so they're all manuscript. But these are Secretary of State records from Colorado, 1866. There's a warrant and an extradition request, a gentleman by the name of Eugene Hamilton. And again, we see things like this, which give us insight as to what was actually going on during these states all the way back in the mid-19th century. There are numerous executive records, and these could be journals, papers, messages, things like that. And they go all the way back to territorial times, pre-statehood. So this is just a list from the Reels Index, and this is about as much detail as you'll get. Governor William Gilpin, 1861 to 1862. His executive journal is there. Here's where it is, and that's what you see. When you actually look at a record like this, and this is the territorial governor of Idaho's biennial message, and I think it was 1846, somewhere around there. No, 1886. This is something I just kind of bumped into. He is writing this biennial message. It's a report to the legislature, I believe, and discussing, what he calls the Mormon question, and why, even though he directly says this, I don't want to persecute anybody. I just can't have 2 sets of rules regarding polygamy for 2 different groups of people. And at first he sounds a little harsh about it, and then you can tell he tries to see both sides, and he even discusses some issues regarding separation of church and state. And this is the type of thing which I don't think is widely available out there. It gives details on what exactly people were thinking at the time. Of course, this is manuscript. It's probably not going to be available in many places, but it is on early state records, and this is the type of gem we found without much effort looking at the film that would be of historical importance to many people. I couldn't help but throw this one in. This was the same governor from Idaho, a pardon And again, we're getting names, dates, facts about people that might not otherwise be out there. He pardons Edward Morton because Edward apparently was convicted under questionable circumstances, and the people in his town lobbied the governor to pardon him because they didn't feel he actually committed the crime. And then the governor says, hey, he's got a family, they're wonderful, he needs to take care of his children, and I'm going to pardon him. Very interesting read here, and again, the type of thing you see in early state records. So hopefully that gives you some insight as to what is in phase 2. Again, sometimes it's more mundane, but other times, many times, it's interesting material such as this. I think that leads us to the question of what type of access will there be for materials like this. Oh, wait, excuse me. Before I get to that, I just want to say, though, that the interdisciplinary research applications for this are rich. I have a legal background, so I'm probably not anticipating them all, but obviously there would be applications for history, law, political science, but I think, genealogists may find it interesting, and then various applications in social sciences. Once this material is full text searchable, people could search for things like housing issues from the mid-19th century and get information they wouldn't otherwise have. Now I can talk about access. So it's great. We can digitize these things. What will the access actually be like? Will you be able to find the materials? That is one of the cornerstones of LLMC's philosophy is not just scanning things and putting them online, but actually providing access to them. So this is a list of broad subject categories from early state records on LLMC. And you can see they're various and sundry. So we've got Alabama, Connecticut, those have already started to pop up. And then apparently some UK materials were thrown in as well. But these are full text searchable with basic logic categories. You have some more features in advanced search. And I cannot emphasize this enough. Not only are they full text searchable, which is great for the printed materials because they're OCRable, but we also write abstracts for every single title we film or we digitize. So I searched for Boston Tea Party in early state records. This is what I got back in doing an abstract search, and these are all the materials which the abstract writers put Boston Tea Party in. And just so you know, the people who write our abstracts, have the background to know, if they notice, two different titles actually reference each other, they will mention that in the abstract. If some historical event affected a publication pattern, maybe there was a war or something like that, they will put that in the abstract. They're experienced librarians. One is a legal writing professor. So they add a lot of value in these, and it's a very rich collection of abstracts to search, and you can anticipate, terms like this and others very easily. And then, as I mentioned before, we do provide full text searching for printed materials. For the manuscripts, we are planning on fundraising for transcription, so they will be full text searchable as well, but at least we do have the abstracts to search those with. So here I searched early state records. I was thinking about Commodore Perry and the War of 1812 for some reason, and I was very happy to get this result. It was a legislative journal from Virginia where they congratulate Commodore Perry and a citizen from Virginia who also served on board with him. Last but not least, in terms of access, we also, and I mentioned this before, we catalog all of these titles individually and provide those records to OCLC. I am based in Minnesota, so I took it upon myself to search Minnesota's OPAC for a rather unique title called The Mental Elevator. It was a newspaper published in Seneca in English in the 1900s. That's in early state records. It's available one other place, and LLMC, and again, I searched the OPAC for it. This came right up, and then users can link directly to that title. So I hope that gives you some insight as to substantively what is in early state records, what we hope or what we plan to find in phase 2, and what we know we will find, and then gives you some confidence that the materials will not just be online but findable to your faculty members and students. I will turn this over to James so he can give you some additional details on the phase 2 offer, and then we will gladly answer any questions you have.
Thanks, Kurt. I think that was a really tantalizing description of some of the content, and I do want to reiterate to those who are interested in exploring this more. LLMC is currently actively digitizing phase 1 of this, and there's a significant body of content up there for you to test and explore, particularly for the 13 colonies and the others on the Atlantic seaboard. I did put a link at the bottom of this slide to CRL's e-desiderata profile about the early state records, and the offer details are up there on that page. But you can get to it directly in LLMC Digital, as Kurt was showing, as part of the special projects browse feature, or in the advanced search you can click on early state records. But so as we look to move forward, phase 1 was the funds were raised for phase 1 digitization in its entirety through the efforts of LLMC directly to its constituents, the law libraries, many of which may be at your institutions, looking for to fundraise, up to $500,000 to begin the project, and I think they've raised significantly more to continue along the phase 1. Because there was such a strong interest and synergy with the types of materials that CRL holds, and in fact CRL holds almost the complete collection, if not the complete collection, of the early state records on microfilm. Kathleen Richman and Bernie Riley and I discussed the possibility of putting this phase 2 out to the CRL membership to raise money to digitize the remaining 33 states of the lower 48 that Kurt mentioned. I think I put here the estimate of about 1,000 reels. Kurt has revised that, I think, to be around 800 reels, just based on ongoing findings of this. And what we were looking to do through the concerted effort to CRL institutions was to raise a total commitment of $500,000 that would cover both the digitization and production costs of that, as well as the cataloging and abstracting of those materials as well. The original phase 1 offer that LLMC had put out essentially broke down the fundraising categories in 2 main levels. At the patron level, institutions that contributed the full patron amount could receive the entire copy of all of the digitized materials in phase 1. At the state level, which is a lesser contribution, those institutions contributing could receive copies of the images from their particular state, or I suppose any state that they wanted to grab. They could nominate what that state would be. So we've taken on those 2 levels as options for CRL institutions looking to invest in this cooperative digitization, so that if you are in a state that's subject to phase 2, that is anything past I-95, you could make a contribution of $10,000 or more and receive copies of those materials from your state. We've also kept the patron level concept that if you want to receive the copies of all of the files from phase 2, you could choose to do so. But we also broke down the offer just to be a little bit more granular based on the level of the institution size or the institution profile. And for this offer, we suggested breakdowns just by Carnegie class, from research-intensive universities down to 4-year colleges. So there was a range of suggested levels per each Carnegie classification, from the lowest range of about $6,000 per institution up to $25,000. And again, if you want to become a patron, an added contribution of $5,000 more, or $30,000 total, would enable you to receive all the copies of Phase 2. We put this offer out last year, and we received a few commitments from interested institutions, and some of those institutions were not just in the Phase 2 states, but they included institutions on the East Coast who were just interested in seeing the entirety of this collection digitized. So they lined up their commitments with us. We did not reach the full $500,000, so we put it out again this spring to see if there were other institutions who had maybe considered it but didn't have the funding at the time. So fundraising continues along this vein. We have several institutions, a few new institutions who have committed funds, and we're about a quarter of the way towards the goal of that $500,000. So we're really we want to spread the information out to you, that is to all CRL member institutions, and we hope that you would consider investing in this program, especially with your law library in mind, or perhaps even co-funded by your law library. That's an option as well. We've created some opportunities, I think, for flexible payments, so that if you wanted to make a commitment but you couldn't commit all this year, we'd be happy to break that out over 2 fiscal year payments, just to make it as easy as possible on your budgets to make this collection accessible. That's the sketch of the offer. As I said, the full details of that information are in eDesiderata. There's a 4-page document that describes some of the details of how they broke down the cost estimates for digitization, and how we structure the offer in order to allow CRL institutions of different sizes to contribute proportional to the size of their own library. I'd be happy to discuss some of those specifics if you had questions now. I think our phone lines are open or openable. If you want to unmute and ask a question, we'd be happy to take those at this time. And it may well be that you don't have any present questions now, but we would be happy to also follow up with you on email or in separate phone calls if that's useful to you.
Hi, Rachel Breckus from Missouri.
Hi, Rachel.
We're in a bit of a difficult fiscal situation right now. Some of us might not even have our jobs in the next couple of months. So is there any way this could be broken down over more than 2 years?
I think that it's possible that we could do that. We suggested 2 years just to make sure that LLMC had the momentum to begin the digitization in mass. We don't want to stop and start unnecessarily. But I think that that's, Kurt or Kathleen, you could easily correct me on this, but if that's really a hardship towards us, then we could do that.
Rachel, this is Kathleen Richmond, the Executive Director of LLMC, and we can be flexible in that area. We have a couple of libraries that have spread the payments out. One has spread it out 3 years, and one, which is, I'm going to name names now, the Maine State Legislative Library, spread it out over 5. But their support is welcome, and as long as we know we can count on that support, we can manage our resources accordingly.
Okay, good. Thank you.
And I am sorry for your budget challenges.
Thanks.
Yeah, we certainly can appreciate that this comes up in competition with a lot of other resources as well, so we want to make sure that we're as accommodating as possible. CRL believes very strongly in supporting non-commercial digital efforts in particular, and LLMC certainly fits that bill. So we want to make sure that those institutions who deserve this kind of support can get it, so we'll be very flexible.
And also, speaking of the fiscal issue, I mean, our very membership in CRL is something that we have to fight for every year locally. And so is there any difference at all in access to this material depending on whether one's library is a CRL member or not? I mean...
Sure. The difference, I think, is LLMC itself, LLMC Digital, I should say, is accessible only to institutional subscribers, whether that's directly through the law library with LLMC or through CRL membership for the main library. So if you were not a contributor to CRL or LLMC, this content would be inaccessible. But if you continued your participation in LLMC, I assume that maybe your law library is an LLMC participant, but I don't know that for sure. You could probably obtain access through that way. Yeah. One thing that we are considering in this is that LLMC has graciously offered that if we reach our total commitment of $500,000, CRL could receive the entire copy of Phase 2, and we could put that up in any manner that we see fit. And I think we would be interested in making that publicly accessible, given the fact that most of this content's in the public domain. But that would probably be, multiple years down the road, so there wouldn't be instantaneous access to that.
Okay, thanks.
Yeah.
As Kurt and James brought up too, the significance of this body of work, this compilation from the 1940s, is becoming more and more evident as we work through the Phase 1 states, and our members are realizing that, including all of you on the phone. So this new collection has already achieved the 7th most heavily used material on LLMC Digital. And as Kurt shared with you in terms of some of the types of searches being done, it's got some really relevant information to today's challenges. So I encourage all of you to let your professors and researchers know about this, because there's going to be useful information in there for some of their research.
Jeanette has posted a comment in the chat, so I can just read that out if you don't have that up on your screen. She said, can you talk more about what it means to receive copies of the files? How would we receive them, and what is the format? Kurt, can you address that?
Sure. They would, so when we digitize files, they are, you would both get images and OCR text. And I hope the reason why I'm stammering is I hope I'm answering your question. And we deliver items like this to members on a regular basis. So typically what we'll do is, I think in this instance, given the volume, we would set up some sort of FTP transfer, and then you would get the images, PDFs, along with the OCR text with those. Did that answer your question, Jeanette?
Generally, each item or object is tied to the metadata, right, with an identifier, and so that metadata probably could be linked up in the catalog as well.
Yes, that is exactly right. We have a unique identifier for every single title in Volume 2. And on a completely unrelated project, I handed over a bunch of data to a donor library, and they were able to parse out different titles and volumes very easily.
And we do that routinely with the materials that we get from LLMC as well. Super. Well, those were great questions. We thank you for your interest. As I mentioned, that Kurt has agreed to record this and send the link out to us so that we can pass it along to the members. And if you have further questions or expressions of interest in this, we will gladly take your comments or emails as soon as you see fit.
Great. Thank you all for your time.